In the early 1200s, the world didn't fear castles the most. It feared the horizon, because from the open steppe came an army that moved faster than rumors and struck harder than any empire believed possible. They didn't build marble palaces first. They didn't inherit ancient cities. They didn't rely on walls, they rode. And within a lifetime, they built the largest land empire in human history, stretching from East Asia to the edge of Europe. So how did scattered tribes of horsemen become a force that reshaped the world? To understand that, we have to begin with a boy who started with nothing, because the Mongol Empire wasn't born in a palace. It was born in hunger. His name was Temujin. The world would later call him Genghis Khan. But as a child, he wasn't a legend. He was vulnerable. The steppe was not gentle. Winters could kill, food could disappear, and clan politics could turn deadly overnight. When Temujin's father died, his family lost protection. They were abandoned by their tribe, left to survive alone. A mother trying to feed her children in a land with no mercy. A boy learning early that kindness is rare, and weakness is punished. Temujin grew up with one lesson repeating in his mind. If you want to live, you must be feared or respected. He faced betrayal. He faced capture. He faced the kind of humiliation that breaks people. But it didn't break him. It sharpened him. And slowly, Temujin began collecting something more powerful than weapons: loyalty. Not loyalty based on family names, not loyalty based on tradition, loyalty based on survival and purpose. Because when Temujin learned to unite people, the steppe was about to become a storm. For generations, Mongol tribes fought each other. Small wars, revenge raids, endless grudges. Temujin did something radical. He broke the old rules. He rewarded skill instead of bloodline. He promoted warriors who proved themselves, no matter their clan. He built a system where discipline mattered more than ancestry. That was shocking on the steppe. Because traditional power came from birth, Temujin replaced it with merit. He also enforced unity with brutal clarity. Betrayal was met with punishment, but loyalty was rewarded. In 1206, the tribes gathered and gave him a new title, Genghis Khan, universal ruler. That moment wasn't just a coronation, it was a warning to the world. Because once the steppe united, it stopped fighting itself. And when an entire warrior culture stops fighting inward, it turns outward. And the first targets were not random. They were chosen, like pressure points on the map. The Mongols didn't fight like traditional armies. Most armies moved slowly. They needed supply trains, heavy armor, and stable roads. The Mongols moved like wind. Each warrior often had multiple horses. They switched mounts to stay fresh. They could travel enormous distances in days and appear where no enemy expected. Their most famous weapon was the composite bow, small, powerful, deadly from horseback. But their greatest weapon wasn't a bow, it was organization. They used a strict military structure, units were controlled, coordinated, and trained to operate independently. They used scouts constantly. They gathered intelligence before striking, they mapped routes, rivers, and weak points. And they mastered a terrifying tactic, the feigned retreat. They would run on purpose, the enemy would chase, and then the Mongols would turn and destroy them from every side. They didn't always win because they had more men. They won because they fought smarter and faster. And once fear entered the enemy's mind, the battle was often already over. But tactics alone don't build an empire. The world had to be shaken, city by city. One of the first major targets was northern China. To many, it seemed impossible. Horsemen from the grasslands defeating sophisticated urban states. But the Mongols adapted. They learned siege warfare. They recruited engineers. They used captured specialists. They didn't rely only on brute force. They absorbed knowledge. This was a pattern that kept repeating. The Mongols destroyed resistance, but they also collected talent. If a city surrendered, it could be spared. If it resisted, it might be made an example. This wasn't only cruelty, it was strategy. Fear travels faster than armies. When one city fell, the next might surrender without a fight. And with each victory, the Mongols gained more: weapons, supplies, engineers, and confidence. But the conquest of China was only one part of the plan, because the most explosive moment came when the Mongols looked west. And the West made a mistake that would ignite one of history's most devastating campaigns. To the west of Mongolia lay a powerful empire, the Khwarezmian Empire. It controlled rich trade cities. It sat on critical routes. It was wealthy and proud. Genghis Khan initially didn't demand war. He wanted trade. But then came the incident. Mongol envoys and merchants were insulted, some killed. In many cultures, that might be a diplomatic crisis. To Genghis Khan, it was unforgivable, because envoys were sacred. The response was not a battle, it was a flood. The Mongols attacked with ruthless precision. They moved across deserts and mountains that enemies believed protected them. City after city fell. Some resisted, some surrendered, but the campaign shattered the region's power structure. This was the moment the world understood. These were not just raiders. This was a machine, and that machine was learning as it moved. But the Mongols didn't stop at Central Asia. They kept riding toward places that had never seen anything like them. As Mongol armies pushed west, Europe heard rumors. Stories of riders who moved like ghosts, cities that fell in days, armies that vanished. Then the Mongols arrived. European forces, many armored knights, were powerful in close combat. But the Mongols didn't fight close unless they wanted to. They used mobility, arrows, encirclement, and psychological warfare. In battles across Eastern Europe, Mongol forces defeated armies that believed they were untouchable. And then, suddenly, the Mongols pulled back. Not because they were beaten, but because leadership had to return east for Mongol politics. That's one of the strangest parts of history. Europe was spared not by strength, but by timing. Yet the fear remained, because the world had now seen what the Mongols could do. But conquest raises a question. How do you rule a world you just conquered? Here's the twist. After the violence came order. The Mongols built systems to control distance. They created relay stations like an ancient postal network, where messengers could ride fast and rest, then continue. Trade routes became safer than they had been in centuries. Merchants traveled farther, goods moved faster, ideas traveled with them. This period is often called the Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace. A harsh peace, yes, but it connected East and West more tightly than ever before. Technology spread, knowledge moved, cultures collided and blended. It was globalization, centuries before the modern world. But this new connected world also carried danger. Because what travels on trade routes isn't only silk and spices. It also carries disease and the invisible forces that can weaken empires. After Genghis Khan died, his empire didn't collapse immediately. It expanded even more. But it faced a problem no conquest could solve. It was too large. Soon, the empire divided into separate regions, called khanates. Each region had its own ruler, its own priorities, its own ambitions. Unity became harder to maintain. Succession disputes grew, rivalries formed, and empires don't only fall to enemies, they fall to internal cracks. Because once power is divided, the struggle to control it becomes more dangerous than any war outside. One of the most famous Mongol rulers after Genghis Khan was Kublai Khan. He focused heavily on China. He founded the Yuan Dynasty and ruled as an emperor in a settled urban world. This was historic, because Mongols were steppe rulers, not city bureaucrats. Under Kublai, the Mongols embraced administration, taxes, and centralized government. But that shift came with a cost. The more Mongol rulers became like the societies they ruled, the more they changed. They gained stability, but they lost some of the steppe identity that made them unstoppable. And in time, resentment grew among the conquered, because being ruled by outsiders is never simple. And as the empire's rulers settled into power, the empire began to lose the fierce unity that created it. The decline of Mongol power wasn't one single event. It was a slow unraveling. First came the succession conflicts, leaders fighting leaders, then local rebellions, people resisting foreign rule, then economic strain, governing huge populations is expensive. And then there were disruptions that hit everyone, climate shifts, instability, and disease. As trade routes connected continents, they also spread pandemics more efficiently. The empire that connected the world also made the world more vulnerable. In China, the Yuan Dynasty faced revolts and eventually fell. Elsewhere, Mongol states weakened, fractured, and were absorbed into new powers. The empire did not end with one final battle. It dissolved, piece by piece, but even when an empire fades, its fingerprints remain. The Mongols changed history in ways most people never realize. They proved that speed and intelligence could defeat wealth and walls. They reshaped borders across Eurasia, They accelerated trade between East and West. They spread technologies, ideas, and systems. They forced nations to rethink defense. And they made the world feel smaller. But they also left trauma. Cities destroyed, cultures shattered, fear burned into memory. The Mongol story is not simple. It's not just glory, it's not just horror. It's a reminder that power is a force, and forces reshape everything they touch. And that brings us to the real question. What does their story warn us about today? The Mongol Empire rose from a land that most civilizations ignored. No great walls, no rich cities, no ancient throne, just grasslands, and people who learned to survive. They built the largest land empire in history not because they were destined to, but because they found a system that worked until it stopped working. That's the pattern of every empire. Unity creates power, success creates strain, and strain creates cracks. The Mongols conquered the world, and then time conquered them. But the world they reshaped never returned to what it was before. Because once a civilization learns a new truth about power, it doesn't unlearn it.